Jeez. Hello everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is the GB190, and this thing is a monster. This is by far the fastest, most powerful quad I've ever flown. And I have not built or flown an X before, and I can completely understand why you see all these people racing with X's. They're awesome. This frame is called the GEP-ZX5, where 5 stands for 5-inch blades. And it's got a nice carbon twill to it. Looks pretty good. Didn't have any rough edges, or seriously rough edges. You didn't see any of the burring marks from poor tools when they machined it. So the frame is pretty good, and the rest of the parts are pretty good as well. This kit features the 2205 Red Bottom motors. They're race spec, that's why they call them RS, I believe. It's got 30 amp Little B's, and it's got an F3 flight controller in it. Well, we were also furnished the PGV, but you'll see all the parts. A couple things I'm going to draw your attention to here before we get too deep into it. Normally, I would go from kind of initial desk impressions to the build video. I'm not going to do that because the build video is really long. I think the build part is like almost 80 minutes. And as I was editing the build video, there's a lot of stuff I was going to cut out, and then it just kind of looked disconnected, and it didn't. It's not that I'm looking for some sort of ultimate flow on the build video, but I leave a lot of the stuff where I'm just kind of working through this, and I'm kind of talking to myself, and I have to reverse course a few times. So if you're interested in watching a super long build video, get a cup of coffee and hang tight, because it's coming. This quad is so much fun. I am going to look to do something in the micro realm with this same sort of design. Not design one myself, but you'll be seeing in the coming weeks something that I'm working on. Do note that I did change my flight controller. I rotated it 90 degrees so the USB port was accessible, because if you can see that clearly down there, you see the little purple? Every time I wanted to change a PID value or any flight controller setting, I had to remove that, and I had to go that route in order to make sure that I wasn't going to get any prop hits, because if you use the zip ties that are inside for the VTX, the SMA connector gets off to one side or another, so then you have to angle it, and then it doesn't sit very securely. And I wanted to keep this kind of down out of the way so it's less likely to catch anything as we're flying. The cap on here does come off kind of easily. I've actually had the cap pop off on just kind of a firm landing. It has a place where you can put your action camera right up here. You can see I've mounted my receiver to the top, so in order for me to get a Velcro cable through there, I'm going to have to do something else. But it flies really nice. It's about 40 grams heavier than another quad I've got that's very comparable to this, but only with 20 amp ESCs. And the VTX that comes with this, it may not be an issue, but you should be aware that it does get warm clear down here. I haven't experienced that before, so maybe this is typical of this VTX, but I wouldn't have the battery connected and no airflow with your VTX for a long period of time. You might risk burning it out, and it could be that it uses the resistance from the antenna and it's just not getting enough, so that heat keeps coming out the tail end. I'm not sure, but you should be aware. It has a CMOS camera, and it does pretty well. You'll see in the footage coming up, it's actually a fairly overcast day, and I fly under a lot of canopy, but it does pretty well, so I was pretty happy with that. So let's jump right to the flight footage. I've got clean flight on here, excuse me, I've got beta flight on here, and I'm running 2.91 stock PADs, no tuning whatsoever, and it flies pretty good. All I did was change the rates. I used .70 across the board. So enjoy the flight. If you want to see the full build video, get yourself something to drink and hang tight. Thanks for watching. Oh boy, it looks awful dark. It's not dark, it's just some condensation on the lens. Now watch this as I take off. I lift off, and oh my, I'm right into that tree. So much faster than anything I've ever experienced. I hit the throttle, gave it some forward pitch, and bam, I'd covered some distance I wasn't used to. So I start to get things under control, and so then I'm just going to fly it around the backyard a little bit. That's enough of me talking. I'm going to bring in some music. this is all the kit contents. Let's start with the fact that we have Emax motors. They come nicely packaged inside these little boxes, which make for great storage cases. So if you don't have a storage system, you'll be able to start that with those. They are 2205 Red Bottom motors. We have little B that aren't so little, 30 amp. As you can see there, 2 to 6S. In the Emax boxes, I've got all the screws and bushings that come extra with these. We've got a CMOS camera, and we've got its mounting kit, packaged individually inside. There's a little instruction series. And right down here, we need to note that its voltage range is 3.3 to 5 volts, which is typical for CMOS cameras. We've got a full set of props, just 4 there, so we didn't get any extras. We've got our F3 flight controller. We've got our circular polarized antenna. Let's crack it open and see what, well, come on now. There we go. As you can see there, it's right hand circularized. Sometimes we never know what we're going to get, so this particular kit that I have has a right hand antenna. It's pretty flexible. Not terrible, but these antennas that come with these kits are rarely all that good, so you might need to replace that. And we've got our TS 5828L. It's a 600 milliwatt FPV, and it's got the button on the back to change channels, and our display there comes with a whip antenna, which sometimes these can work perfectly fine, but oftentimes these are really poorly constructed and they don't work as well as the ones I just make for myself, which is just some coax that I snip off the end and expose a little bit of the inside wire. And we've also got the wire that goes from our VTX to our camera, and these are extra wires. Well, we may need them to wire up our camera. Oh, the flight controller does come with the typical things that you would find with all the different wiring assortments. This is a retail package. We've got pins, we've got both straight, and we've got bent pins, and then we have the case for it as well. We won't be needing that because this is going to be a relatively tight build inside the GEP-ZX5 5-inch props goes on this, and it is 190 millimeters from motor center to motor center. It says its stated weight is 101 grams of just the frame, and you get a little blowout there of how things go assembled. We have a little bits and pieces, battery strap, standoffs, another camera mount, arms, zip ties, battery lead, pre-tinned. They did an okay job pretending, but we still need to add ours and some foam pads. First thing we'll need to do is reorganize. We'll start with our motors and our ESCs and the bottom part of our frame. Okay, to assemble the bottom, you need to put the plates just like I have them here. And we just got the arms lined up in a nice little X fashion, and then you line up the holes to where they match up with the arms, and then this X, which is aluminum, is right over here. And then we have our PDB, which I didn't really originally show you, but it is included in the kit. And I'm going to orientate mine this way, because 5 volt towards the camera, 12 volt towards the rear for the VTX, and that would then, you would have a nylon nut here that goes down, and this will sit on top of it. And then when you go to do your battery, maybe bend the ends a little bit like this, and then you just kind of solder around where those posts are to each side here. So because this is going to be kind of a three-handed job, I wanted to show you how that bottom part lays out. And we'll need to put our standoffs on as well, because that's going to be the limiting factor for our stack, because on top of those is going to be the camera head. So we don't want to be building up real high, because then we're going to run out of parts. So I'm going to assemble this and we'll be right back. No, I'm not done. I wanted to show you just how this goes together instead of just acting like you'd figured it out. So you have 3 of these screws. You go through these 3 holes and they line up with the plate in each direction, and they go directly into this. And oh, wrong one. and they tighten down directly into this alloy piece. And I would encourage you to use a little bit of, let me get it out here. Oh, geez, it's stuck. I've got some right over here, I believe. Some little thread lock. Put some thread lock on there. Just because we're going metal on metal, I'm a little bit worried those will rattle loose, and we don't want our arms falling off in flight. So, use some of this. Whatever you get, blue is semi-permanent, as it says, and you'll be just fine. I've got it all assembled here. You can see that I've got the nylon lock nuts. You use longer bolts, the 10mm bolts here, where your 30mm mounting holes are. Your PDB, well, actually, like I said, the PDB would go on this way. And the next part that I'm going to do is I'm going to put the standoffs in, because the standoffs are going to be our limiting factor on how tall these things can be. And our stack is extraordinarily short. These are our standoffs. They're the black ones, and they go in these holes right here. So let me get a pointer. So you put a standoff here, 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 and here, and you use the M3 screws that are 6mm long, just like you did on the outer holes and on the far inner holes for the bottom plate. And then we have another plate that goes on top, which will go on just like this. See the arrow pointing forward? So everything has got to fit between the top plate, which will rest on these standoffs, and our PDB. So pretty short stacks. We're going to need to be pretty clean on this. Okay, I've got the metal aluminum standoffs on, and you also see that I've got some male-female nylon lock nuts that come in the kit to separate between our PDB and where our flight controller will be. They look like this. If you're not familiar with the nylon lock nut kits, we have our female end and our male end, and I'll just put the last one down here. So you can see that all you've got to work with on your stack is here down. And when you put your flight controller in, you may even want to put some electrical tape on the bottom of your flight controller to keep anything that might be touching inadvertently from actually shorting anything out. And that's the way I'm going to proceed when we get to it. But we've got our base of our frame together now, so we can reorganize and we can start to work on our ESCs and our motors. We're ready for motor and ESC soldering. You'll notice that I already have the battery strap in here. In this particular case, that's not all that important, because we have that nice gap right through here in the middle, that even if we weren't to do that now, we could do it after the fact. But as kind of a habit, we want to make sure we get that battery strap in pretty early. In this case, it wouldn't be that big a deal. If we didn't, we could do it after the fact. And I've already done several of my ESCs, and really what I've done is, and I'll show you this in a minute, but I'm trying to get a close up here. If you can tell, I've just cut the shrink wrap or the wrapping that they've used, and I've exposed the solder points, because my plan is to put on the motors, and this will be the side that we solder to, and I'm going to take our wires and I'm going to wrap, if I can get these all threaded through there, and I'm going to wrap them. Now, you don't have to do this. You can solder directly to those, or maybe in this case I'll do something different, because I have other build videos where I've done that. Maybe this time what I'll do is I'll just cut these a little bit short, and I'll put a little kink in them and solder them this way, and kind of lean them in and lean them out, and I'll solder them directly to there, and that will actually decrease our weight slightly. But something else that I tend to do, and I'm going to do it on this build, is I'll put some electrical tape right here on the arm. So with the heat shrink that's on there and the electrical tape, I typically secure these down using silicone tape, which it works fine. And the thing that I like about the silicone tape is that it's rubbery, so if it holds it down firmly, but if you get into a violent crash, instead of snapping or breaking something, things should be able to shift. So if you have a motor that becomes dislodged or an arm that breaks, it won't potentially break the PDB the ESC is on. It should shift with it, or give a little bit, so impact resistance. But let's go ahead and cut one of these down, and I'll show you. I just use my little wire snips, and I start down here low, kind of just dig one edge underneath the wires and get around to the side, and just start snipping away at it. If you don't want to do this and you just want to take it all off, that's perfectly acceptable as well. If you don't want to put electrical tape on the arms, that's fine, because you've got the heat shrink there too. Got a little hanger on there. So there we go. Now I'm going to move my frame out of the way a bit. And how I tend to do these, and I'm going to get my favorite little helper out here, my little blue tack. Stick that down good. Stick this down good. And when I bring the soldering iron in, I'm going to put my hands, oh, I'm shaking the camera too, sorry. I'm going to put my hands on these wires to help hold it in place. I'm going to apply heat this direction and pull with this direction. This happens mainly because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you may want to do it the other way, or any way that works for you, really. But I'm going to put a little solder on my tip of my iron. We want it good and hot, usually around 350 degrees. I got mine a little high. Let me turn that down. I'm going to go with a clean tip. Get some out. Add a little bit to the end. That just helps with heat transference. There we go. Do that 3 times to all 4 ESCs, then we're ready for the next step. I should add that now that we have these all exposed, we should probably go ahead and add a little bit of our own solder right to those solder pads. It's pretty simple. You just heat things up again. Bring in your solder where the tip is. Don't want to spend a lot of time in here, just get in and out. Now we're ready for the motors on this part. We've got our ESC prepared. We've got a motor mounted. You'll note that this one turns clockwise, so it is the right rear motor, spins in towards the tail. So follow that with your motors. And now all I'm going to do is get a fix on where our placement's going to be. And then I'll cut the wires, and I'm going to approximate this. You may want to stick it underneath, but you can tell that gets to be a little bit problematic. I don't want mine sitting up on there. I want to pull it back from that metal a bit. So what I'll be doing is I'll cut the wires about here and retin them. I'll just go ahead and do that now. I'm going to cut the wires, try to cut them straight across, leave a little bit to... Ooh, cutting all 3 at the same time. There we go. You can strip these. I typically strip them with fingernails. You can also use a knife or a wire stripper, whatever you want to do. But because they're silicone wires, they strip them nicely. I just kind of pinch them and pull. Comes off pretty clean. I don't think I have long fingernails. I just have a little bit there. Some people don't have that much. That's okay. Okay, now I'm just going to give them some twisted action here, as much as I can with wires that short. Just trying to keep all the individual wire threads together. Will help us create a nice solid joint. I haven't twisted them much. It should be fine though. You're going to take your little blue tack, wedge it underneath, keeps things in place. Clean our tip, apply heat and solder at the same point, and then run the solder on down. Next one. Okay, That should be good. Oh, got a little hanger on there. That should be good. I did secure the motors with some thread lock blue. Just put a little dab on my plate, rub the screw around in it, and then run it up through. These screws shouldn't be a problem. These are 4mm arms. And if you want to check if you're touching the windings, which is very important, let's see if I can do this on camera. I tend to shine a light through there, and I look for the screw to see where is that at. Oh, my flashlight just went out. Typically, if you get the right angle with your vision, you can see the very top thread, or if you can't, then that's a good thing if it's mounted securely. Because I couldn't see clearly that these longer screws here that comes with the kit weren't necessarily touching the windings, I'm going to back it out, and I'm going to use these shorter screws, which definitely won't be touching the windings, but you won't have as much attachment to the bell of the or the housing that you're to mount to. So something to be careful of. They do come with the motors do come with two different lengths. I think a good suggestion is to use the shorter one. The longer ones might be fine, but I'm not going to risk shorting out a motor just so I can use the longer ones. Here's a little build tip for you. There is a little bit of shifting that you can see in these motors, and in this particular case with these Emax motors, you can see it here better, that the motor stem and the bushing and the E-clip, they come down actually beyond the motor, so it's important to make sure we get that as centered as possible. We don't want that E-clip or the bushing or anything rubbing on our carbon fiber and creating resistance. That'll make it run uneven. So you have a little bit of play in there. Use it to your advantage to make sure you get this thing centered up and it spins around and doesn't touch any of the carbon fiber. So in my case, looks like that is the center, and so then I'll go ahead and screw it down. I usually go in a star pattern, just like you would with tightening. I get them all pretty snug and then crank them down one at a time. At least this is how I was taught to change a tire. Can't necessarily go in a star because we only got 4, but just go across, rotate around. Okay, I used a smaller bit of my blue tack underneath there to hold my ESC, and the reason why I'm doing that, it just makes for easier soldering, and then I can manipulate the wires and the ESC back as I get the solder joint secured and get the ESC in the place that I want it. So I typically, when I grab these little wires, use my little curvy needle nose. For some reason that just works for me. Regular needle nose are going to work. You can also get some, I think they're forceps. You can pick those up in various places. And we're going to solder these down. Because I'm right-handed, I'm going to work from the right and go across to the left. Clean my tip. I don't like that one. I'm going to redo it. That's better. Now I'm going to wire all mine up straight, and then I can change motor rotation via the BL Heli Suite through the pass-through through the flight controller, and you can do it differently when we get to the point where we're testing motor rotation without props. How I do that, and I'll show that to you, is I just put my finger on it and feel which way it's rotating, and I just use the master slider in clean flight to rotate it as slowly as I can to get a feel if it's rotating the right way or not. You can also put a piece of tape on the top and just kind of have like a little flagpole, and then you can use that to feel which way or see which way the motor's rotating. You switch any two wires to get the motor rotate a different way, or like I'm going to do, you can use the BL Heli Suite. Another way, if you're going to do this style, instead of kinking it over like that can create a stress point here on our solder joints. And so another way you can do that is you can flip your motor over. That way when you're soldering, you're laying the wire flat, and so the kink should actually come in the wire rather than the solder joint. So I've got a little piece of blue tack underneath here, and I've got some blue tack under here, and I've just kind of lined things up, and that will give us the ability to decrease the stress on those solder joints. So that's another way you can do this as well. There's no right or wrong way. I'm sure you'll find 1,000 opinions about this, but I just wanted to show you this other option. As you can see, I've got all the ESCs secured and soldered to the motors, and now we need to get these leads, the red and black, connected to our positive and negative on our PDB. You can see I use silicone tape, and as I mentioned before, I like to use that stuff because it gives us a little bit of wiggle, but it also secures itself down, and it vulcanizes to itself, so it doesn't actually stick to anything that's not silicone tape. And you can find that in various places, and then you can find it in a number of different colors. Some of them are quite ugly, though. I have this green that I was hopeful didn't look like this. Hopefully that comes through. It's kind of a muted, ugly green. But anyways, you know, you got red and you got blue and black. So as you can see, I've got these wires all over the place. And because the PDB that comes with this kit, you have all your positive and negative on each side, we need to do some wire routing, because remember, our flight controller is going to stack right on top of this. Right on top of those nuts, our flight controller is going to go. So we've got to keep everything pretty low profile in here. And as you can see with this particular ESC over here, I've already got the positive wire run through, and then I'll cut it short, and then we'll solder to that, just like this, and that will help to keep our wires down. And then with the negative wire, I can just come around here and solder it to the closest part. So this would come here. At this point, I do suggest that you have your battery strap in, because it's going to start getting a little bit tight under there. And if you forget to do that, or you have a battery strap that breaks later, you can use a library card or a driver's license, credit card, you know, anything that's that type, and create kind of a funnel by placing that underneath the aluminum bracket and just below the, or not underneath the aluminum bracket, but just on top of the aluminum bracket, and then underneath the PDB, and you can create like a funnel so you can route your battery cable through there. It would probably be easier if you had some of the plastic that comes with a lot of the packages that we get, and just cut out strips that are this wide, slide them through, and then slide your battery strap through. So if you forget, you can do that later. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tin these up. We should do that, tin up our pads, and I'm going to go ahead and do them all so that we're ready to actually strip our wires and connect them down. Got my solder good and heat, my soldering iron good and hot. Just cleaning it a bit. I'm probably shaking the camera a little bit. Got my little lead over here. Now let's go ahead and tuck those under so they don't get in the way. Those two are particularly in the way. Everything else is handling itself. But if this is your first build, you might not be familiar with tinning, and all you're doing is you're applying some solder to these pads. Bring the solder together with your tip while in contact with the pads, and it should just flow right on there. That's probably enough, but I'm going to go ahead and add a bit more. I'll probably fast forward through a good portion of this, because once you've seen the start of it, you just do the same thing on all the pads. And I'm going to go ahead and do the 5 volt and 12 volt too, so they're ready to go. Okay, so these are all tinned up, and now I want to get kind of a drier measurement. And I have a new tool. It's this. I don't know what it's called. GHP170, made in Italy. I bought it off of Amazon. Cuts wires pretty nice. It's got a real slim profile and a little bend to it, so that's pretty handy. Actually, I think the only time I've seen this used in a video when it has to do with quads is the Big Whoop team, when they make a tiny whoop, they use these to pull the props off, so maybe that's handy for that too. But so I don't want this terrible tight, but I want to get a measurement. So just cutting a little bit off there, and how I tend to do this is I just use my fingernails, but you can use this to snip around the edges. I just use a little bit of fingernails that I have, grab it, and pull it off. That one wasn't very clean. I'll pull a little bit more. Give it a little twist. I'm not sure if that's really even necessary, what the benefit is, but I should ask my dad. He's an electrician. I was always taught to do that, so I still do it today, even though many years have passed since I worked with him. Just going to tin up our end here a bit. Oh, come on, get the flow going. And I'm going to use my curvy needle nose to grab a hold of it, because it's probably a little bit warm. I'm going to rotate this over so I can solder from this side and use my left hand for manipulation. And I'm not going to go directly to this first pad. I'm going to go to the second pad, just because the first pad should come right here. Oh, I need some more tinning on that. I just noticed it was splitting apart. Didn't get it flowed through quite enough. I should do it. Keep your prop handy so that you know about where things are going to come and how close they're going to be, so you can move the prop around and make sure you're keeping everything secured and out of the way. These are the props that came with the kit, by the way. So that's one down. Now I need to do the negative or black wire, and I think I am going to run it this way, about like that. So I'm going to cut it here. Well, I'm struggling to get it right in the tip of my curvy needle nose here, so I got to use my other hand. Hopefully you could hear that kind of crackling noise. That's where you're warming up the solder, and you'll get good flow down to your pad, so you have a good connection. And the nice thing about this PDB is that you've got all the same wires over here, so it doesn't matter if they kind of get too close to one another. It'll be fine. And the same goes with our positive side. Typically when I'm building quads, I use a PDB where they're, I hate to say it, but more organized, so that you have a plus and minus near each ESC, and then you have a separate plus and minus for your battery. We don't have that in this case, and we're going to go ahead and use what came in the kit. So do this, route your wires where you need to, where you have to go clear across the PDB, route them underneath, solder them up. When we come back, we'll do the battery lead. I've got everything soldered here, and we need to do a dry fit of our board. The arrow points towards the front, but you can change these in rotations however you want. The main thing to look for is your motor leads, where you want the signal and ground going to, and also your USB port, making it accessible. Now normally you might want to rotate this to get towards the side, because a lot of our quads we build are longer, so you want the USB port to be in one area or another. Because this is a pod, it really doesn't matter. But we're just going to put this on here and do a dry fit. Goes on there pretty snug. Want to make sure we've got some clearance, which you can see we do. Just for my own protection, I don't usually, but in this particular case, I think it's because if one of these leads comes off in a crash or something like that, or it comes a little bit loose, or it shorts and touches another one, I'm probably going to put some electrical tape across the back here just to protect mine. And something else that holds true with these OC Day F3 flight controllers, because I use Lemon satellites, because that's what I got started with, and I've never forked over the cash to go with anything else, and these have been around forever. You can get these for anywhere from $5 to $8. I usually just go with the cheapest source. This board, just like the last one, is mislabeled. So if you're using Spectrum, your 3.3 volt, I'll see if I can do a better job than I did last time filming this. Cover this all up. Focus, there we go. So our 3.3 volt label is over here. Oh, focus camera. There we go. You can see our labels here. Well, it's out of focus again. So you can see the 3.3 volt label. It's over there. But our plus pad is actually down here. So that's where you want to get your power for your Spectrum satellite. And then you've got your negative up here and your positive over there. And you'll need to wire this up from the bottom and then run your lead around to the top. I typically stick them on top, but because our stack is so small, what I think we need to do next is we need to build up the top part where the camera and the VTX goes, to see what kind of space we have. Do we have room for our receiver between the flight controller and the next layer of carbon? So I'm going to get those parts out. We'll get ready to do that. Okay, here's a look at the instructions. And of course these things aren't always really clear. But this is the way, this is my first time building a pod, so this is the way I am going to attempt to do it here. So we've got an arrow here, it points towards the front, and that's our top plate. That goes, whoa, right on here. So you can see there's not a lot of room in there, but I think if I get everything flush down, I'll be able to mount my my naked satellite right on top of the flight controller, so I don't have to do more clutter. Everything will be nice and tidy in there. But we've got some little slots cut here, and they're pretty tight, but we just kind of wiggle things down in there. See, it's down in there. I'll move this prop that I bumped. And we take an 8mm screw. It goes through this little hole that it kind of creates. And we need to have our nut. Now this is going to be pretty fidgety, so I don't know how well this is going to film. So let's see, how can I do this? I did it once. Turn it flat so it doesn't try to slide out so much on me. And in theory, that little spot should hold it still for us to mount down. Nope, wrong size. Still wrong size. Let me get the right size. And we just screw this down here. Yep, so you can tell it doesn't hold, so we're going to have to bring in our needle nose or something, a pair of pliers or something to hold on to that. These nylon nuts, they can be pretty hard to thread the first time. But that, we didn't quite get enough to keep it in there. Let me turn that down. A few more turns. This isn't perfect to be using needle nose on these. But we just want to hold this flat while we get a few more turns in. I'm not going to crank down on it because we want to get everything assembled first. There we go. We should have a little bit of play and it shouldn't come out. Okay. So then I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Get that down in there. And there's only 2 of these nuts, and they're the only metal ones that come in the kit. Everything else is nylon. This has got nylon inserts so that it won't come loose with vibrations. We don't want this stuff come flying off or dangling into a prop, that's for sure. Go right through this hole. Oh, can I hold it with my fingers? Is that enough? Yeah, okay. So, on to the next part. So this is our camera and our camera mount. And it should go like this. And it should mount right in here. Get things lined up. You see the hole? Am I lining that up with the camera? That hole and that hole should line up. And according to the schematics, we use the self-tapping 2.7 millimeter, which is these, I believe. So I'm going to put this in. Oh, and that's Phillips. Just going to get those started a little bit. Oh, I cranked that bottom one down too much. So that'll give us the ability to change our camera angle relatively easy. Okay, so we've got the alloy parts. Better get our top plate in. Did I do myself in? Oh, I did. I did myself in. I didn't give myself enough space. Okay. So out with the camera mount, or at least on one side. Put our carbon fiber piece in, get it to line up and close up here. And then get my camera mount, hold them out, line up again, and we'll go right back in there. And these, for your GoPros or what have you, your action camera, I think it goes this way actually. Yeah, that seems to make more sense, but you also have to have your alloy piece in there. So we'll push that in, and according to the instructions, we use which size screw? 6 millimeter. Is it 6 millimeter? These have got to be 8s. Yeah, it's got to be these. And they've got a bit of knurling on the aluminum part here, so we should be able to hold on to those with our fingers. Little bunny ears. Tall side towards the front. Do the same thing for the other side. Just kind of a loose fitting. We'll screw everything down in the final stages. Keeping it loose still. Okay, we got those two. Now we need to do the other rod up front. Gives it some visual interest as well as some added durability. And in theory, I think if anything were to come along, you center a tree branch or something, it should possibly keep it from hitting the camera. So now we've got our pod loosely assembled. And we could have mounted the camera beforehand. It probably would have been easier, but it should still be doable. Connector down at the bottom. And then we would just put the screws down in there. I think one thing that, now that I work through this a little bit here as I record,
I'm going to go ahead and screw this down a little bit more. It's kind of flopping around a bit more than I'd like. We need to get our cable out for our camera and VTX, because our VTX should fit in here as well through the back. And then we use these holes to zip tie down, like on the SMA connector here, and then through these holes to actually secure the VTX. We've got a hole here. I think that might be just to decrease weight, but because you're not going to be able to see that. We're definitely not going to be able to see that. It would have to be pointing up for us to be able to see that back in there, that where that hole is. So we would have to have the VTX underneath, and there's no room for that. So the VTX is going to have to sit in here on top. Let's get those wires out. So we've got the VTX and the wires that came with the kit. Should be more than enough length. It would be nice if these were silicone wires, because those are a lot easier to work with. After fussing with this for a bit, I did decide to take the camera mount back out of our housing and mount the camera in it. That was a mistake doing that the other way around, but live and learn, right? I guess I could edit that out and no one would know. Right? I'd have some really disjointed video. But these are the same size screws that you'll find in the back of the camera, and we're just going to secure the camera through those holes. The camera kit comes with it looks like 2 replacement housings as well, so if by chance your camera housing gets damaged but your camera's still okay, you can replace the housing. There's our camera mount, and I had to fuss around with this quite a bit. It was kind of a fumbly little thing. You can see I split it out over here, so there's a possibility that these screws weren't exactly perfect for it. But it's in, it's firm. Now we can remount everything. Second burst, same as the first. What song is that from? It's like an old-timey song. It's like a sailor song, I think. Okay, so that's back together. And I've got our VTX with our plug. And we need to get some dry runs as far as measurements now. This is going to be 5 volts. So it's going to need to come to the front. We got 2 choices. We could either run it right out the front, down through our handy dandy hole. Maybe that's what the hole's for. Sits on our nylon standoffs. Let me see if I can hold this together and show you. So we want to put this camera angle in the highest forward position. Now I've got everything too tight. So that would be our longest length that we would need. That's crazy high angle. Maybe you fly like that. I don't have those sorts of skills. So we hold it all together, and we know that it comes down to our board. You probably can't see this, but about where my fingertips are. So this is where I'm going to cut it. Or at least the red and black wires. The yellow wire is different because it is going to go to our VTX, which also has its own lead. So then this will come back up through here. So these will come down forward. This one will come back. And it really doesn't, we don't need much. We don't have audio, so we can take that pin out. You see right here where it says audio. So we can depin this from the white lead right there. All we need is 12 volts, which is in between that range, or ground in our video. We don't even need the black wire on the other side. So I'll do that. If you're not familiar with depinning, it's pretty tough to film, but I take my little X-Acto knife and I stick it underneath here, and I pry those up, and then I pull out the pin that I want to do. Let me see if I can do it real quick. Otherwise I'll cut it out. So these are all one wire, so first off we need to separate them. And we don't have audio, so no reason to have that stuff there. I push them in a little bit. I'm going to do the black one first. So get right in front of the little tab. Oops, I got them both. Let's pull on them both, see what happens. I think I got them. Yeah, there we go. So that wasn't super zoomed in, but that's how you depin. That's all we're going to need. And then we plug this back in. Now we'll go back to our dry fit. So if I take those down through there, that would be even shorter. I could probably go through that arrow too. That arrow that we have here. Let me see where that... Well, that's just about straight down, so that's pretty good, I think. Plus from the front it kind of keeps things cleaner. But if we went through the arrow, now that would be the farthest reach we'd have. So I can trim that a little bit further. I'm going to leave it that length. It's not going to cause me any problems. And it's going to give me a little room to work, so I can solder it on there and then I can put this back on. So we'll do that. We'll leave it the length it is. We won't try to shorten things up as tight as we can, because that may give us repair problems. And then this will go probably down through the same hole, except for the yellow lead, of course. So we'll strip that. Oops, bumped the camera, sorry. So that will allow us to run a zip tie through to secure our SMA connector down, well, at least part of it. And to reach that button, we want that pointing up. So rotate everything around. That way we can get in there and we can see our channel, and we can press a button to change the channel. So that's the way we should probably do it. So dry fit time. Try to show this to you a bit. Gonna leave ourselves a little bit of slack for repair. I'm gonna go about right here. Okay, I'll strip those wires and tin them up, and then we'll look to solder them together. Probably should do the yellow wires first, because those two are going to attach to each other. So, and we got room to stuff everything up in there if we need to. I've got everything stripped, and I've actually already tinned it up too, everything. And this is just a little yellow wire. I've got my heat shrink, if you can see that right down in there, just kind of slid in there. Now I'm going to add a little bit of solder to my tip, which is a little bit dirty, but should do the job just fine. We'll bring it in here. Let it cool a minute, or a second. Fish out our heat shrink. Run it down over the top. I don't have a heat gun, so you could use matches, I guess, if you wanted, but I just use the edge of my soldering iron and just lightly run it across the top, bottom, kind of rotate it around. Don't spend too much time anywhere. And this is more than we need, but this will allow us to do repairs in the future. Say we rip off our SMA and we have to switch out our VTX. We've got a little extra wire length there to work with. We don't have to dismount everything to make it work. And we can just wrap this up and put it inside this pod, and it should be safe. So the next part is we're going to wire up these wires, and you're probably thinking to yourself, why is he doing this now? He's going to get into a spot where he can't get his flight controller on there. And yeah, that's true to a bit. But we should be able to disconnect these connectors and then pull everything apart or leave it in place. We should be able to flop it over to its side, and then we can do the rest of our work. Going to be a little bit messy, but there might be other ways to do this better. Maybe routing the wires through the big hole, that way the connectors and everything come through. That would be one way of doing it, I guess. thinking through this, I think the first thing we need to do is tighten up this top. Where'd my screw go? We need to get that hunkered down, I think. We can tighten everything else up after the fact. But this screw we're not going to be able to get to once we get it mounted. So if we leave the front side exposed, but we route everything else, or we route this down through there, we should be able to lay this back like this, do the rest of our work here with the flight controller, and then put this back and still be able to solder our lead. Boy, with the flight controller on, are we going to be able to reach that? Going to be tight. Should be doable though. I think that's what I'm going to do. If I have to make a correction later, then we'll note it at that time. Okay, after looking at this for a little bit, I do think this will work. You can see I've got the wire, the video wire laying there on top, and we can mount this right here. But my mistake comes in that I've already got this secured, and the ends of the zip ties we want to be up here, not down here. So I am going to have to reverse course a bit and take this top off in order to secure our zip tie down for a VTX. So I'm going to take this off and secure the VTX. Alright, I'm starting to get quite a mess on my desk. So I've gone ahead and I've gotten everything kind of tidied up, and here's a little shot underneath the camera, and then another shot here behind the backside. You can see I've got my yellow wire, which is my video wire. I'm not necessarily crazy about how this came together, especially because we have a right angle antenna, and if you put another antenna on here, I would suggest it kind of just come back and clear the props. Try to... there's a possibility you're going to catch something when you're flying forward with this antenna, and it could rip our SMA connector off, because this SMA connector isn't secured down here, it's secured above it. So if you can squeeze yours down further, that would probably be better. But that's what I've got so far. What I'm going to do here, this is our wire for a video transmitter, and I'm going to put that to the 12 volts under here. I'll just kind of bend these things up, and I'll put this to the ground and to the positive. After everything's all said and done, I should be able to get my camera on this side, even with the flight controller on it. So I'm going to go ahead and solder that up. Let's see if I can get that done and still on camera. Still have my soldering iron. Let me clean that up a bit. Give that a little pull test. So this will snake around. Actually should have... yeah, I'm going to reverse that. I don't like that kink in there. I'd rather have a twist than a kink. But that's going to make soldering a little bit more difficult, isn't it? Okay, that should do it. So I should be able to just lay there, here, this here work, do my flight controller work. And we should be all set, right? We also need to bring 5 volts from our PDB up to our flight controller. So we can take a little extra wire that we might have. This is vinyl wire. I'm going to find some silicone wire, and I'm going to bring that around. You can see I've got my leads on the 5 volt over here, but before we get to securing that to our board, we need to get our receiver. In my case, because I'm doing the Spectrum and I have to go from the bottom side, I need to get that set up. So let me push this out of the way. And I've decased this to save space, and I've also wrapped it in electrical tape, and I'll use a partial piece of this foam to secure it down to the top side of this board. And I keep this lead around only because it's color coded. The white is signal, orange is actually red, and green, because oftentimes when these are shipped, these lemon satellites, you get one of these and you either have to remember the pinout or you've got something to compare. I choose to compare because I am not that good at memory. So we plug this in, and we know which is which is which is which. And we take this, and we're going to get a little bit of a dry run. Let's just see if this would. So a 3 volt here, negative signal. So if we had about this much, we'd trim back to our 3 volt. That would be, we'd go a little bit shorter, I guess, to there. So if I do a comparison, stretch this out. I cut it about there and be safe. So I'm going to tin this up off camera. We don't want to watch that time and time again, do we? And then we'll come back and we'll solder that onto the board. I've zoomed in here a bit so we could see, but it's probably going to look pretty shaky. So I've got my lead over here and I've cut it off that we previously talked about. I jiggle the camera again. So all I'm going to do is just tin this up with a little bit of solder. And I'm going to tin this up with a little bit of solder. Oh, that didn't stick. Not getting my solder down there. There we go. A little bit more just for good measure. Okay, so now what we have to do, we need to go kind of slow because we've got 3 black wires and which is which is which is which. So we do our comparison and we know that the first wire is our signal wire, our middle wire is our ground, and then our far wire is our power. So I'm going to do the signal and the ground first. So our signal is going to go right here. And let's see, how am I going to run this? This will be towards the back. I can really loop it any way I want. I might come around the side. There should be a little gap in there all the way around. Okay, so let's make sure I got this right again. Signal is the wire I've got a hold of. And let's bring in some heat. Oh, need to clean it. It'll take but a second. Be sure comparison ground. Now the power wire, let's take this off. And if this is the back and I run this around the side, I can plug it in this way, or I can plug it in, which I'll probably do it like this. This is what I'm going to do because we've already got everything secured down as far as our signal and our ground. I'm going to go ahead and cut this. Let me get my scissors. And stick it on the board. Don't want it to go in there because that's where our nylon nut's going to sit. So it's got to come around the side, and then we're going to twist it a bit and stick it right up here, but we still want to be able to get to these pads. That should do it. Now I route this wire back down. Stick it all back down to my blue tack. Get a little bite. Clean my tip. That should do it. Pull test is good. Pull test is good. And if we needed to clean this up a little bit, we could actually use some hot glue just to kind of get things out of the way. But we should be able to stack those wires right in there, and they should be fine. And let me get this back into screen here. Still got some work to do. I forgot about that. We've got to route these, push these wires in and out and around and back, and so we can make some room for these ports. So our power wire's got to come down right in between. Maybe need to reverse course on this a bit. Because that's already off to one side. I wonder if we just shove these in a little bit, if that'll get it done. We could always just jerk those ports off, but I don't want to do that. You never know what you're going to reuse. Got one, not the other. Okay, so is that down? Not quite. Pretty fiddly. We'll get it. There. Now we need to get the nylon lock nuts on there. Where'd those go? No, I need to take those off. I forgot to do something I mentioned earlier. See, we forget. It's not that we forget that's important, it's that we remembered, right? I need to get my electrical tape on the bottom that I wanted to use as some added protection. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then we'll come back and connect our 5 volts up to our flight controller. Okay, so everything looks good so far, right? Well, there's a problem. As hard as we work to keep everything in the stack down, there's still not enough clearance. I've got my receiver wires that I had previously soldered on. I put on a longer lead so I could get it up in there. Now we're ready to finally get 5 volts down to our board. And being we don't need any of the motor ports outside of 1 through 4, we can really choose any of these, and we just go to the plus and the minus on those. I'm going to start with the voltage. If I can get a hold of it, I've used some pretty tiny small gauge scrap wire that I had around. So hopefully you will be able to see what I'm doing to some degree. Oh, but I need to tin it up. I'm going to go down here to number 7. And use that. Got the port connected. I'm going to kind of twist things around so that I have a spot to go to. Well, let me get my fingers working here. There was one. Get a hold of this little tiny wire here. Kind of bend it down. There's 2. So the next phase is going to be our signal and ground. Now, I think I've said this in the last few builds. There's been more and more people that are doing this without the grounds. Sometimes, depending upon the ESCs you're running, that can create an issue possibly. I go ahead because they're all available to us and just wire them up. There's no harm in that as far as I can see fit. So you need to kind of do a dry fit and a cut and a tin to our motors. Let's see, let's orientate this the correct way. So if this is our nose, then we've got motor 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we'll need to take this lead and we'll need to run it to 1, this lead to 2, this lead to 3, and this lead to 4. Now typically what I do is I run those underneath. That way I can take the flight controller off and just kind of lay it all forward. And I don't know if we're going to be able to do that. We should have clearance under there to do that, but we are going to have to loosen our flight controller in order to do that. So we'll loosen our flight controller a bit, we'll route the wires as we go, and we'll cut and solder these things up. Alright, you can see here I've got my 5 volt, I've got that secured. But we should still be able to manipulate our flight controller on and off. Got just enough in there. And as you do your wiring, if you're not real comfortable, if you want to double check if you've got something poking outside of the stack, you know, like I said before, just put a prop on, make sure it clears. Make sure it clears. You might even want to put 2 props on to make sure you don't have something hanging out where it shouldn't be. So we've got our motor alignment. This is our nose, this is our tail. And we've got motors 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they correspond to the numbers on the flight controller. So we want to take our first candidate here, and I'm going to just kind of navigate it around my camera pod, and we want that to go under the flight controller just like all the others. This is easier to do when you can get your nose up nice and close, but with the camera in the way, it's not as straightforward. I think I'm hooking on something on the other side. I'm definitely hooking on something. I can't get it underneath. What's going on? So we don't want this to be excessively tight. When we cut these, we want to have a little bit of room to work with. You know, of course, we want to be able to strip our wires down too, but if we keep everything kind of angled towards these center posts, we should be fine as far as our prop clearance goes. And we can also manipulate these things back a little bit underneath the flight controller. But we don't want to be too long, we don't want to be too short. So this is motor 1. That's where we're going to start. It's at the top here. And just doing a little bit of a dry fit. I think cutting them right there will be about right. I'm going to snip. Pull it back out just so I can... What is over there that I keep hooking on? Oh, that's my receiver wire. There we go. Let me... So we don't need to expose a lot, and the heat from the solder will probably burn back this vinyl coating a bit. Sorry for the jiggling the camera. I have to get some tension and torque from somewhere, so I rest my forearms on the desk here. So our signals are white wire. That's going to go to our top row, and then our negative here to this row. And let's tin up those pads. I'm going to go ahead and just do the first 4. That's all we'll be needing. Could have done that when I put the flight controller or the 5 volt on there, but I didn't. Don't want to spend too much time getting these tinned. We just want to get kind of in and out real quick. There's one. Can't see. There we go. So you want to do the same thing for all your motors. Remember, we've got motor 1, 2, 3, and 4. You want to go in that sequence. Make sure you get the wires in the right locations. I typically add hot glue to these leads because of the vibration that we get or in crashes. That way we're not just solely depending upon the solder joint holding up. It also helps to decrease the wires from jiggling, possibly from wind or anything else. So it takes the strain off the solder joint and distributes that to the flight controller. So just a little bit of hot glue across these, and that will go a long ways. But you don't have to. It'll work without it. After you get done with that, we'll be ready to connect our receiver, which
Won't be in this video because that'll depend upon what kind of receiver you have. I'm using the Spectrum. I've got a video on that, and I can link binding your Spectrum receiver up there. I'll bind the Spectrum, and then we'll look at clean flight after we get our power lead from our camera sorted out, and we'll plug in a battery and give it a test. As you can see here, we're fully assembled now, and we'd done most of the work up to the point where we connected the signal and ground wires up to the flight controller. A lot of the rest that you have to do up here in the pod is just kind of finagling, and I've got a picture I'll put on screen now. And what you see here is the wiring, and it's a little bit of a mess inside the pod here, but the pod will keep it contained, and it does give you, if you have a little bit of extra wire up in there, it gives you the flexibility to take the pod off so you can do work on your flight controller and your PDB the way we've wired things so far. The camera angle, you have to be careful about the camera, because if you get the receiver mounted too far forward, you can't get the camera in a lower angle. You have to go pretty high. And as you can see here with mine, my setting's pretty modest, and this is just where I'm going to start now, because the next step, I've got clean flight on this, and I went ahead and flashed mine to the latest version of beta flight. And you can do the same. You can stick with what comes on it. I've already gone ahead and I did used the BL Heli Suite to reverse motor direction, and I used a little red silicone tape to add some flair to it. And this is more about the build itself. You can find videos about using the BL Heli Suite in order to reverse motor direction, and you can also find videos about how to flash beta flight. All you have to do is, like in the case of reversing motor direction, search for flash BL Heli, and then put little B. Joshua Bardwell's got a great video on it. I think it's 14 minutes. He really goes through a detailed explanation, as he does for a lot of things. There's also a flashing video. I think Josh has got a couple of those as well, but you can just do a search for flashing beta flight. And you want to make sure you get the F3 hex file for beta flight if you choose to do that. The receiver, as you can see here, I've got some double-sided sticky tape, and so our receiver comes from the wires you've seen previously. Getting this grommet in was a bit of a challenge, but once I got that in, and I just took the camera pod out, because that's really one of the few pieces you can take out and keep the pod intact, and I just work with needle nose and my fingers where I can reach of getting everything connected and put in there. You have to be careful about, especially with this right angle antenna here, of making sure you get enough prop clearance. On this side it's not too bad, and originally, because I had a zip tie farther down in there to hold the VTX down, I ended up taking that off so I could get it straight out the back. And that's going to be pretty important, because you'll end up angled over here to this motor, and you can see our clearance is pretty minimal over here. And just to show you that the upper edge of that blade will clip that right angle. I think in the future you might want an antenna that performs better, and instead of having this right angle come up, if you get an antenna that's flexible and holds its shape, you can screw it in and then bend it up, and that will give you even more clearance from the prop. So all is left now is to put the rest of the props on, put the spinners on, and go fly it. I'm going to take it outside and we'll do a little line of sight test. I think this thing's going to be a beast.